Good evening, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to today's video. I want to talk about what I think the best and the worst case scenarios. The best case scenario for Republicans in 2022, as well as the best case scenario for Democrats in 2022. Before we get too far into the video, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, of course. And I also want to ask y'all, if you haven't already, a like, a comment, and a subscription. They truly do help, and I greatly appreciate all of them. And important links are down in the description of the video. Now, we do have a few open seats, and the reason why I'm using a lighter color is because I want to talk about, I'm going to highlight which states would be flips. We have 3 retirements so far in the Senate, and all 3 are Republicans. Sorry, make that 4. I completely forgot about North Carolina's open seat. And yeah, so the good news for Republicans in this case is that, number one of those seats is in a safe red state, and another one is in a state that is close to safe red at this point, and that's Ohio. And Alabama is the super safe red seat. Now, the other 2, Pennsylvania and North Carolina, are the definition of toss-up states. But the Republicans do have some good news. It is a year that should be favorable for the Republicans. And in traditionally competitive states, that does actually matter. Pennsylvania and North Carolina are both more traditionally competitive. And by that virtue, in a year that is theoretically good for Republicans, they should do even better. And I would actually argue that their partisan lean is both in the tilt to lean red margin. So the Republicans, even in a not fantastic year, should be able to hold both seats, along with Wisconsin, though Ron Johnson is going to have his own unique race, and that's going to be one of the last, actually, it's going to be the last Senate seat I take a look at when I cover it, each race individually. And we'll talk about California next time I do that. That's not going to be a competitive seat, by the way. So we're going to start with the non-incumbent party, and that's the Republicans. And for them, what they're going to want to do is they're going to want to, of course, take Arizona. They're going to want to take or flip Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. They need to hold North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. They probably should hold Iowa, or they're going to want to hold Iowa, but that's not as competitive as I think maybe we would have seen years ago. They may try Colorado, but I don't think Colorado's that up for grabs. And they will want to flip New Hampshire, and that's kind of it. The territory for Republicans to play on, they have about 3 states they really need to play defense on hard, but they can aggressively go after Georgia and Raphael Warnock, especially if he votes party line almost exclusively. That could hurt him in Georgia and the suburbs, especially where the voters are more moderate. Arizona, Mark Kelly I think he's a good campaigner. I'm not entirely sure he's going to be able to hold on to that seat in a very good year or even a reasonably good year for Republicans. Arizona is still slightly more Republican than the national environment, enough to where the state, if the election were 50-50 or even, I think I did the math, and if the electorate were about maybe 0.25% more Republican nationally, Arizona would have been a Trump state. So, yeah. It's just McSally was a terrible, 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 terrible candidate to run in Arizona, which has a lot more very moderate voters. And if Mark Kelly runs into the same issues as Warnock might run into, where he's encouraged and pressed to vote more in line with the national Democrats, the Chuck Schumers, Nancy Pelosi's of the world, it's going to be very difficult for him to win a full term to that seat, especially if, say, Doug Ducey decides to run. Because even though Ducey isn't exactly the most popular with the Arizona Republican Party, among normal Arizonans, the polling information that I've looked at seems to indicate that he's not hated. And then there's even other decent candidates for Arizona, and I talked about a few of them. Nevada is not as blue as people are saying, but it's also a surprisingly difficult lift for the Republicans. But it's not a lost cause, I don't think. And I believe it's Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada is the incumbent senator there. I'm not entirely positive the Republicans in Nevada have a great bench. I'm really not. So I could honestly and genuinely see her keeping that seat, even in a very good Republican year. But let's assume the Republicans find somebody who they can convince to run under their banner, who is able to compete. Well, yeah, then in a perfect world it would flip for the Republicans. I'm saying a perfect world for the GOP. Obviously, they'd have to hold Wisconsin. They'd have to hold Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, which with 3 of those 4 states having retiring incumbent senators, that is a little bit more difficult, but Ohio is a little bit easier, and they can just rely on the state itself and the state's demographics to carry them over the edge, and the state's partisan lean. Even a slightly subpar candidate wouldn't be the worst, but DeWine would be a very good fit, I would think. In Pennsylvania, I'm not entirely positive who they could get to run, who could win the Keystone State, because I'm not 100% positive on who is in their bench. Maybe Stellar Spark could help out and, talk about that. Well, Brian Fitzpatrick, Pennsylvania won their representative there in Bucks County. Yeah, he'd be a very good fit. If he can win effectively a district that is controlled by one of Pennsylvania's collar counties, that's good enough, because that will allow him to do better in Pittsburgh suburbs and Allegheny County, as well as the collar counties of Philadelphia. But he'd also do well enough in the rural Pennsylvania, Erie, and some of these coal, steel towns, Scranton, for example. North Carolina, the bench gets really weird, and North Carolina is basically the textbook example of a turnout election. And turnout will decide that state. So I'm actually probably the most confident that the Republicans are going to win that one out of Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. North Carolina is the one I'm most confident about. Because North Carolina, like I said, it is the textbook example of a turnout state. And the reason for that is its demographics. It is basically nothing but demographics and racial polarization. I don't like using that term to explain away an election, but unfortunately with North Carolina, when we talk about redistricting, North Carolina, and when we get to that state of the live stream series, you'll see what I mean by that. But basically, North Carolina's electorate is split between those who vote extremely heavily for Democrats, who are about 90% African American, and the other voters who vote for predominantly Republicans, who happen to be about 90% white. And that explains why North Carolina is so competitive. It's probably closer to about 80 or 85%, or about 80 to 85% of white people vote for Republicans in North Carolina. And it works out so evenly that every election is going to be super competitive. And it's basically how many of the very few swing voters in the research triangle vote for the Democrat over the Republican, or just don't show up, basically. But if I had to choose a state that was going to stay in Republican hands, if all the others fell, like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, and Arizona, all went Democrat again, and if it was Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, I was told only one of them went red, I'd say it was North Carolina, just because of the way the demographic is broken down. And then New Hampshire. I'll talk about this, of course, when we get to New Hampshire in our individual series, but if Chris Sununu decides to win, I'm almost tempted to put it into the likely Republican category, because in a Republican favorable environment, you have a popular governor who is from a very well-known family and well-liked family in that state, against admittedly a generic Democrat. And I mean, you've also got, death by Sununu jokes. Yeah, I think Sununu would absolutely. If Sununu ran, it's one of the biggest and easiest calls I can make against an incumbent, and it's one of the few times I would err against an incumbent. Now let's talk about the best case scenario for the Democrats. Obviously, they want to hold on to those 4 seats. They'll want to flip Pennsylvania. They'll want to flip Wisconsin. They'll want to flip Iowa. Want to flip North Carolina. They may want to, but I don't think they'll be able to flip Iowa. Lisa Murkowski should hold on unless something really weird happens in the jungle primary. They may try to go after Rubio, but I think Rubio is just too strong, and even in the best possible year for the Democrats, Rubio would win. I don't really see any other competitive ground. The truth is, for the Democrats, those are the 4 seats that are competitive that they can attack. And when they have to play defense, their money is going to be spread much thinner than the Republicans' money will be. And that's the truth of it. And I'm sorry to all the people who think the Democrats are going to get outright control of the Senate. By the way, this would put them at 54 seats. I think the Republicans getting to 54 seats is far more likely. But I don't think the Republicans will flip all the seats. Truthfully, I think they will at most get 2. That's not even a joke. Now, Ron Johnson has his own issues with being a bit, maybe too close to Trump. He did, and I actually support his decision or his request to have the entire $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill read aloud in the Senate. I support that actually because I think senators and congressmen should know what they're voting on. I don't think that they should be allowed to carry a vote until they've all read the bill and not just had their staff read it to them or read it and make notes about it and give it to the senator or congressman or congresswoman. Or you get the point. No, senators and representatives should have to read or listen to the bill being read to them. Because guess what? How do you know if you support something unless you've read it? But because of how close he is to Trump, maybe there's still some reaction against that. I'm not so sure that's a thing. We saw in 2010, for example, a lot of people would have said after 2008 presidential election as well as the House and Senate elections concurrent with that, oh my God, the Republicans are collapsing. They come back in 2010 and just wipe the floor with the Democrats. Trump is different, yes, but I think people forget just how long of a time 2 years is in politics. And I think that there's going to be that continued trend of local Republicans doing better even at the national level than Trump did. And Wisconsin was one of the closest states in terms of both raw vote and percentage. At the end of the day, I think that's just a great example as to why I think Ron Johnson should be favored in that race and why I would err on the side of caution and err on the side of the incumbent. Ohio, I don't even really consider it all that competitive. We discussed that race already when we heard that Rob Portman was retiring. And guess what? My thoughts really haven't changed. Tim Ryan can make the race competitive, but in a Republican favorable year in a state that is getting deeper and deeper and deeper red, there's only so much a perfect fit Democrat can do. Just ask Joe Manchin how it feels to be a perfect fit Democrat in a very deep red state. I mean, look at Montana, for example. John Tester. He only just barely won in a Democratic wave year. In a state that surprisingly was not all that much more Republican than Ohio is. Relative to the nation, I need to qualify that, relative to the nation. Pennsylvania is a state that is definitely flippable, on the other hand. In North Carolina, I'm also, like I said, I'm not sure exactly how competitive that seat is, just because of the demographic reality and the nature of North Carolina elections. Pennsylvania, like I said, is very flippable. And that is because the Democrats actually do have a solid bench. And the Republicans' bench is not the greatest. If I remember correctly, it was Barletta who ran in 2018, and to be quite honest, he didn't do all that great. Now, yes, was it a Democratic wave year, with a popular Democratic incumbent? Yeah. So part of it was candidate, part of it was environment, and it kind of all just added up to a poor showing for the Republicans in that race. The Democrats, I think Fetterman is one of the front runners. He's from a coal town, and he is lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania. He thinks he can win this race, and honestly, I wouldn't be too shocked if he managed to squeak out a victory, but it's going to be an uphill battle for any Democrat in a way in a year that should be favorable to the Republicans. And until I see evidence that it's not, I'm going to err on the side of history, which says that the Republicans should have an advantage nationally, simply because they are not the party of the White House. And guess what? The party of the White House also has a trifecta. Now, in the House, I think there's probably a 95% chance that the Republicans take the House. And that would be if I excluded the fact that they are going to net enough seats to take the House simply from redistricting. So I am pretty much calling it right here, like I think most handicappers are, that the Republicans are going to take the House in 2022. The Republicans are therefore more than likely going to be focusing on the Senate. But that's kind of where things stand. I genuinely think that the Republicans should take both chambers, in my opinion. I think they'll net the one seat necessary to take control of the Senate, and they're almost certainly going to take the House. But we'll see what actually happens. At some point, I'll talk about the gubernatorial races. But anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I'll see you all next time. Take it easy. Have a very nice evening. Bye-bye.